Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio, and today's episode is going to be somewhat of a continuation of a previous episode where I talked about the hardest alternative win conditions in Commander. But instead of talking about the hardest ones today, let's talk about the easiest alternative win conditions to pull off in Commander. Now, when I say easy, I don't mean just as soon as you play the card, you just auto-win. I mean, maybe with a couple of them, but we'll get to that later. But anyways, it's not just like hey, just include this in all your decks because, you know, you're gonna win with this alternative win condition no matter what happens. You still need to actually build around the card and make sure that you have the right things in order to actually make it work. So there is still some work involved, but in my opinion, these alternative wins are just a bit easier to pull off than the ones I mentioned in the other episodes. So let's jump into them with my first, and real quick, these are not in any particular order, except for probably the last ones, and we'll get into that. So, let's talk about the first ones with Deal with Life. We'll start with Feldar Sovereign. Feldar Sovereign is a 4/6 cat beast with vigilance and lifelink that costs 4 white. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. So, in Commander, actually in Standard, this would be pretty difficult to pull off because, you know, you have to essentially double your life total. In Commander, you start off at 40, so as long as you're at your starting life total or higher and you get to your upkeep with this in play, you win. So you already meet that requirement just by playing the game of Commander to start. Obviously, you need to have some life gain and other synergies in the deck to actually make sure your life total stays that way. And because it's a creature, it can be dealt with. But let's get to another one that's somewhat similar, Test of Endurance, which is an enchantment that costs 2 white. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you've got 50 or more life, you win the game. So this one takes a little bit more work because you need to gain 10 life, which is not hard. And I have kind of ragged on life gain as not a good strategy, but not one of the best strategies in Commander because there are other ways to take out players and so on and so forth. But life gain, this actually kind of benefits you for playing a life gain deck to play these kinds of cards and to win by having a pool of life that is either 40 or 50, depending on which one of these you have in play. Test of Endurance, again, even though it's 10 higher than your starting life total, it might be easier to pull off just because creatures are easier to deal with than anything else. Enchantments are pretty difficult for certain colors to deal with, and if you don't have the right card, you can't really get rid of Test of Endurance, so unless your opponents can knock your life total down below that mark, you're going to be able to win with it. And again, if you're at 100 life, then you play one of these, it might be tough for your opponents to actually take you down to that mark. So obviously with this kind of a deck that you're trying to gain a lot of life, you might run things like Blind Obedience, which slows your opponents down by making their artifacts and creatures come to play tapped, and you can also extort off of that. So basically, anytime you cast a spell, you can pay a white or black mana, and you just drain all your opponents for 1. You pretty much gain 3 every single time you do that. A deck that's got like Aloro, when your commander's Aloro, you just basically gain life for free. So that is another good way to kind of say, okay, I'm just going to keep getting life, teleporting up, and then I'm just going to cast this, and I will stall and win from there. Beacon of Immortality is another good way to kind of help, actually at instant speed, kind of get to that life that you need to get to. So again, if you've got your Test of Endurance in play and you're only at 30 life, your opponent's might not be worried about that because like, oh, he's 20 life away. There's no way you can get there. Then you cast your Beacon of Immortality, which is an instant that costs 5 and a white and says double target player's life total and shuffle that into your library. So essentially you go from 30 to 60 and then your upkeep happens and then you win right away. So it's just, there are definitely a lot of ways you can pull this off. They can work in a lot of different life gain decks. Again, they can be dealt with, either by getting your life total below the amount that needs to be, or Feldar Sovereign can more easily be dealt with by just destroying it because it's a creature. But the requirement of getting to either 40 or 50 life really isn't that high of a bar. So yeah, these are definitely viable and not automatic wins when you cast them or whatnot, but they are easy alternative win conditions in my opinion. Next up, we've got Revel Enriches. This one is an enchantment that costs 4 and a black. It says, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 minute of any color to your mana pool. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. So this one, I'm just going to put a personal opinion in here really quick. I kind of actually wish that this one didn't have that alternative win condition on it, because I think I would actually play it in more decks if it didn't. Basically, this can put like a target on your back the second that you put it down, because people can think that you're trying to win with it, even though you might just be like, I just really want to get a bunch of treasures so I can get more mana with them. But that's aside. Anyway, regardless, 10 treasures is not a lot to get, and that is why it does put a target on your back when it comes down, because, you know, one board wipe, essentially, you know, someone casts a Wrath of God, and essentially you just automatically get 10 treasures because you're playing a 4-person game and people have creatures in play. So basically, and that kind of prevents other players from playing board wipes too, in fear of getting you those treasures that you need. You might also play something like a Spell Swindle, which counters target spell and then gives you X treasure tokens where X is that spell's converted mana cost. So essentially, maybe you're at 5 treasures. The player before you, before your turn, casts a spell that has 5 converted mana cost. You counter it, you get your treasures, your upkeep, and then you win. So this one isn't that hard to pull off. I think that if you put it down too early, it might be, because you're going to give your opponents some ways to think ahead of time and stop you from doing what you're going to do. Really try to stop that Revel Enriches. If you're playing against a deck that, you know, an aristocrat style deck, you just might automatically get to those 10 treasures because they're, you know, sacrificing things, and they're going to have to stop at a certain point, and they're going to be like, okay, you're at 8 treasures. I can't sacrifice things. My deck really can't, you know, keep functioning the way it's supposed to function because I need to wait and stop you from getting those treasures. So this one, I don't think it's the most difficult to pull off. I think that 10 treasures is very easy, especially in a game of Commander. Again, one board wipe will generally get you there. And again, I kind of wish that actually didn't have that alternative win condition on it, so I could play to more decks without really putting a big target on your back. But it's a fun way to win, regardless. Next up, let's go over Simek Ascendancy. Simek Ascendancy is an enchantment that costs green-blue. It has pay 1 green-blue, put a ++1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever 1 or more ++1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simek Ascendancy, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if Simek Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So this one is where, you know, Revel Enriches is about treasure. Simek Ascendancy is all about ++1 counters. Now, the thing about this one, that when I first read it, I was like, oh, that might be more difficult to get to when it first came out. But then I didn't realize, I then soon realized that, yeah, for each ++1 counter you get, if you get 10 ++1 counters on a creature, you also get 10 on Simek Ascendancy. It's not just each time something happens, you know, it's not like for each individual counter. I'm talking in circles right now, but basically it's easier to pull off than I initially thought, because you get those growth counters per each counter, not per the time that it happens. Anyways, regardless, 20 growth counters is not hard to get to. If you're playing in any kind of a ++1 counter deck, you can get this very easy and very quickly. If you've got something like a Forgotten Ancient in play, this can really help. It says whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a ++1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of ++1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. So basically, players are casting spells. That's what you do in Commander. You have to cast spells to do anything. So even if you're just getting 1 spell per round per player, that's 4 for you, and that's 4 growth counters, and then you get to move those counters off of Forgotten Ancient onto another creature, and that's 4 more growth counters. So that's 8 growth counters just for 1 turn around the table without anything else happening except for players casting 1 spell per turn, and that is counting yourself too. Hardened Scales is obviously another way that can really help you out with this. It's an enchantment that costs a green. It says if 1 or more ++1 counters will be put on a creature you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on it instead. So again, this basically just doubles up the amount that you're getting. So again, with Forgotten Ancient, that could be an absurd amount. Basically, with that same scenario, if you've got enough creatures in play, that'd be 16 counters on Simek Ascendancy just for having both of these in play, and each player casting 1 spell in a turn. And of course, you could have something like Evolution Sage. It's a 3/2 elf druid that says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So this one is, hey, let's just put a land into play. I'm going to proliferate all the ++1 counters on all my creatures, so I get a growth counter for each of those, and then I get to proliferate that growth counter too on my Simek Ascendancy. Just a little icing on the top of the cake right there. And again, obviously, Simek Ascendancy also gives you the ability to put that ++1 counter on a creature you control by paying 1 green-blue. So if you're getting really close and you need to just, dump mana in there to do it, you can just do that and get to there. Again, I do want to mention that these all that I've mentioned so far are upkeep triggers, so it's not, that's kind of like the stopgap that Wizards has put in recently on alternative win condition cards for the most part, where okay, you have to meet this requirement all the way to your upkeep to make sure that, you can't just pull off on your turn and then win from there. You have to kind of, not stall, but you have to be able to survive and to keep it in play until there. So you do have to protect it. But again, with Simek Ascendancy, there are ways to obviously get counters on at instant speed. So even just on the card. So you can just pull it off kind of, not out of nowhere, but somewhat. Next up, let's go over Helix Pinnacle, which is an enchantment that costs a green and has Shroud. It has pay X, put X tower counters on Helix Pinnacle, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 100 or more tower counters on it, you win the game. So when you're initially looking at this, you're like, oh, 100's a good amount. That's a lot. But obviously, there are a ton of ways, especially in Commander, to generate infinite mana. And then this is just a, hey, I have infinite mana, I win. You do have to wait until your next upkeep, but it has Shroud, so it can be really hard to deal with. There aren't too many enchantment sweepers out there that people play, at least in Commander for the most part. So you get this out. You get your infinite mana with something like a Basalt Monolith, Zerta the Dawnwaker combo, where you get infinite colorless mana, or something like a Pili Pala, I can never say that name right, Pili Pala, and Grand Architect combo, again, where you just basically just generate infinite mana. Yes, you can do a lot of ways to win with infinite mana, and you don't even need infinite mana necessarily to win with Helix Pinnacle. Maybe you have a commander that really can help you generate a lot of mana on its own, or helps you pull mana, but basically, Helix Pinnacle is hard to deal with. Again, unlike all these other ones I mentioned so far, it's probably the hardest, it's definitely the hardest one to interact with, because you need that sweeper to take care of it. And again, that 100 tower counters really isn't that big of a deal for most commander decks that would actually want to pull this off. So that one can be a very resilient and easy to pull off combo. Again, it's not just an auto win, but it is something you can get down on turn one, and then you can just build and build and build and build and build with pretty much, not guarantee that it's going to stay in play, but you can be pretty sure that it might. Next up, there's Approach the Second Sun, which is a good win condition for mono white, because mono white, I've mentioned before, needs a lot of help. But basically, Approach the Second Sun is a sorcery that costs 6 and a white. It says, if it was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach the Second Sun in this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th on the top, and you gain 7 life. So, this one basically is, hey, if you cast this twice, you win. Essentially is what it does. I mean, the first time you cast it, if you didn't cast it before, it goes back in your library 7th on the top, and you gain some life, which is nice. But basically, you just have to dig back down to get to that again, and you can do a variety of ways to dig back down. There are times when you can cast this for the first time in a turn, dig down, and cast it again. Again, infinite mana is definitely a thing, but you don't even need infinite mana to do that. But basically, with a deck like this, you might be running things like Ghostly Prison. So you're going to Pelifort up. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. So you just Pelifort up, you sit there, you cast your Approach the Second Sun, you just keep sitting there, you keep stalling, you keep waiting to get back to that. Maybe you've got something like a Pull from Tomorrow, which can dig down to get the right card that you need right before your turn. Draw X cards, discard a card at instant speed, it's a very good card. And then you, at your next turn, cast Approach the Second Sun for the second time, and you win. This one is, I mean, not... There are ways, obviously, if it's countered or whatnot with any of these, if they're countered. But this one is hard to interact with compared to some of the other ones, because it's not sticking on the field. It's not waiting for an upkeep trigger. It is something that, unless they can counter it, or unless they get it back, you get it back into your library and then they mill it or whatnot, it's going to be tough for them to stop if you've got yourself set up properly. So this one, I would say, is a pretty easy alternative win condition, and one that is pretty reliable for a lot of decks. But, in my opinion, the easiest alternative win conditions... Yeah, I did say alternative win conditions because there are a couple cards that essentially do the exact same thing, are the lab ban win conditions. And let's start off with the original, the OG, Laboratory Maniac. Laboratory Maniac is a 2/2 human wizard that costs 2 and a blue. It says if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. So basically this turn, okay, instead of me getting milled and losing, I mill myself and win. It essentially kind of turned that on its head. I believe this one came out back in like Innistrad, basically, but a lot of decks started getting built around this as a primary win condition, where literally the entire deck is just built around that. And then, of course, recently we had Jace Wielder Mysteries from, I believe, War of the Spark, a Planeswalker that has 4 loyalty, which really doesn't matter. It says if you draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. And it's got a +1. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, draw a card. So this one actually kind of gives you the means to actually draw that last card that you need. So you get this in play. You've got no cards in your library through one way or another. You +1, and then you just win. And the most notorious, probably as of recent, is actually Thassa's Oracle. A 1/3 Merfolk Wizard that costs blue. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to one of them into your, put up to one of them on top of your library, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game. So this one, you really don't care much about that scrying. That scrying does not matter. You don't even need, any, you basically are just going to have no library as it is when you cast this or when it comes into play. So you don't care about that scrying. You just need that, you just need to get that win condition off the ETB. Again, there are a lot of ways in Commander. There are a ton of ways in Commander to just mill yourself or to get rid of your library. And Thassa's Oracle is definitely a top. I mean, all these are top in CDH. I believe Thassa's Oracle, though, has taken over when it comes to CDH as kind of a primary, like, tough or best win condition, potentially. Again, I'm not a CDH player, so I can't really speak to that. But from what I've heard, that's true. Some ways to just ditch your library entirely are like a Leveler. Leveler is a 10/10 for 5, but that doesn't matter. When it comes into play, remove your library from the game, so you just exile it. So your library is gone. Cool. Okay, now next time I draw a card, or Thassa's Oracle when it comes into play, I just win. Hard to stop. And then, of course, Demonic Consultation is actually kind of the known combo right now with Thassa's Oracle. Basically, you just name a card that's not in your library, and then it says, okay, let's search for that card. And then, you keep going, exiling cards from your library. I believe they're exiled, so I've got the old text on it. But basically, you just remove your entire library for 1 black mana at instant speed. Yeah, it's very tough to stop. It's very, again, like, these, I would say, are the easiest out of all the alternative win conditions to pull off. There are a lot of ways just to ditch your library. In Commander, you've got access to a ton of things to do that, and they can be very hard to stop and interact with, especially Thassa's Oracle, from what I've heard. Anyways, that's all the easy alternative win conditions that I'm going to be mentioning today. Obviously, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode that I'm not going to be bring up any of the banned ones or ones that are silver bordered or whatnot. So the easy alternative win conditions, I've already gone over the hard ones. So if you want to go over to my episode on the difficult ones, go ahead and check that out. But yeah, comment below with your thoughts on what you think the easiest alternative win condition is in Commander, and yeah, let me know. So anyways, thanks again, and have a good one. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.